This recording is on Chapter 6, where we're going to talk a little bit more about loops and nest our if statements and loops within outer loops. So what we really want to do is we want to combine our loops with if-then statements. This makes your program more complex and allows for the user to enter in data that can then be processed in more complex manners. You can nest as many loops as you want to inside a loop, and you can nest as many if-then statements as you want to within a loop. Just make sure that your logic is on track and that the functionality meets the user requirements. So here's an example of keeping track of the user input. The scenario for the pseudocode that we have up here is the user will enter a number. We're going to validate that number, and then we're going to determine whether that it's a positive or negative number, and we're going to accumulate that, or we're going to count up the positive numbers a user entered and the negative numbers a user entered. So we can see here that we're going to declare number, positive count, negative count. They're all integers. We're going to initialize all of them to 0. We're going to ask the user to enter a number or enter in 0 when done. So 0 becomes your sentinel value. That's going to be stored in our number variable. So lines 7 through 15 are our loop, our outer loop. So we have while is number, number, and number not equal to 0. So what we have to do first is we have to determine the data type. If it is a number, then we're going to continue into the loop. If it's not a number, then we're done and we're just going to come out. And we want to make sure they didn't enter their sentinel value. So we want to make sure that number is not equal to 0. Once both of these are true, we're going to enter our loop, and the first line of code that we would execute is line 8. So we're going to use our if statement. Our condition for here is number greater than 0. So if number is greater than 0, then we're going to increment our positive count accumulator. What we're going to do is we're going to take positive count, we're going to increment by 1, we're going to take that value, and we're going to store it in positive count. Then when we're done with line 9, we're going to come down to line 13, and we're going to ask the user for another number. Enter number, enter 0 when done. They're going to input number. We have our end while. We come back up to line 7. We verify the condition, or we verify that it's a number, and that number doesn't equal 0. Then we come down to line 8. We repeat our if statement, and we continue this loop, line 15 through line 17, where our body is line 8 through 14. So we continue processing this until the user enters 0. And the last 2 lines of code, they're just going to output the amount of positive numbers and the amount of negative numbers. So what I want you to do is I want you to do desk checking on this example. So when you do your desk checking, you're going to go and we're going to give you some input to use. We're going to assume that the user is going to input into these 6 numbers, and they're going to enter in 0 as their sentinel value. You want to set up your table, and your table is going to start with the columns for each variable. We have a column for number, positive count, negative count, and final output. Take a couple moments to complete your desk checking, and then come back and start the video again, and we'll see how well you did. So you should be done with your desk checking now, and you should have this table filled out. But let's walk through it together. The first line, I'm going to declare 3 variables, number, positive count, negative count, and I'm going to assign them to 0. I'm going to take my first line and just put 0 in for those 3 variables. Then I'm going to come back over and I'm going to ask my user to enter a number or enter 0 when done. My first number is 2, so I'm going to go ahead and change my value of number to 2. So I've taken care of those 2 lines. And I'm going to check my condition in my while statement. While is number number? Well, 2 is a number, so that's true. And number doesn't equal 0. Well, 2 doesn't equal 0, so that's true as well. I'm going to come down and I'm going to execute my if statement. If number is greater than 0, then. Well, 2 is greater than 0. I'm going to come and I'm going to execute this line of code where I'm going to take my value of positive count, which is 0, and I'm going to increment it by 1. 1 plus 0 is 1, so I'm going to enter a 1 in positive count. The next line of code I will execute are my prompt to my user and then asking them to input another number. My second number is 4, so now my number has a value of 4. I'm going to come to my end while, which loops me back up. I'm going to check my condition. 4 is a number, so that's true. And 4 doesn't equal 0, so that's true. So I'm going to come into my if statement. If number is greater than 0, well, 4 is greater than 0. Then I'm going to increment positive count by 1. Positive count is 1. I'm going to increment it by 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to ask my user to enter another number. My third number is -5. So I'm going to change the value of number to -5. Come down to my end while, come back up, verify that it's a number. -5 is a number, and -5 doesn't equal 0. So I'm going to enter the body of my loop. I'm going to evaluate the condition in my if statement. -5 is not greater than 0, so I'm going to come to my else or my default statement, and I'm going to increment negative count by 1. Well, negative count is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. So negative count is now 1. I'm going to enter in a new number. My new number is 100. Come down to my end while, come back up. 100 is a number and 100 doesn't equal 0. So I'm going to enter my loop. I'm going to check my condition. 100 is greater than 0. I'm going to increment positive count by 1. Positive count is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. I'm going to come down and ask my user to enter another number. My next number is -7. Come to my end while, come back up. -7 is a number and -7 doesn't equal 0. Come to my if condition. Number is not greater than 0. So I'm going to increment my negative count by 1. Negative count is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. I'm going to ask my user to enter another number. My next number is 15. So I enter in 15. I come down to my end while. I check my condition. My condition is true. I enter the body of the loop. I check to see if number is greater than 0, and it is. So I'm going to increment positive count by 1. Positive count is 3. Add 1 to it. That's 4. I'm going to come down and I'm going to enter another number or enter 0 when done. Well, I'm done. I come back to my end while. It is a number, but it now equals 0. So this is no longer true. So I am completed with my loop. I come and I output positive numbers entered and negative numbers entered. I have 4 positive numbers and I have 2 negative numbers. I take the value that's stored in positive count and negative count and I concatenate it to my output. Hopefully you came up with the correct information. Now let's see what it's going to go and it's going to do in Raptor. Okay, so now we're in Raptor. I have a lot of the information already in here because you guys know how to do that. You don't need to watch it. So I have all my declare statements set up. So I have those 3. I've asked the user to input a value. So I have this one. And then I have my 2 output statements down here at the end. I'm going to enter in this loop with my nested if. So that loop is going to go after I ask the user to enter a number. So I click on my loop symbol. I come down here. It is a pretest loop because my condition is up here at the top. I'm going to put my condition into my diamond. Is number and number not equal to 0. Click on done. And then I have my if statement. So I'm going to use my selection symbol and come down here. And then I'm going to say number is greater than 0. So if number is greater than 0, then I'm going to go and I'm going to increment positive count by 1. So I'm going to use my assignment statement. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting positive count plus 1, and I'm going to assign that to the value of positive count. So if it's greater than 0, I'm going to increment positive count. And I'm going to do the same thing for negative count. I'm going to increment negative count by 1, and then I'm going to store it back in negative count because that's my accumulator. I have my if statement taken care of, and then I'm going to come and I'm just going to copy the same prompt to my user, and notice I'm going to put that in my loop. So I'm going to put that down here in my loop. I'm going to ask the user to enter in a number when done. Let's come and let's look at this and let's see if it still makes sense and if it matches what we have. So I have my 3 variables that I've assigned to 0. I'm going to ask my user to enter a number, and then while this is a number and number not equal to 0, I want the loop to be entered. Well, you'll notice here that if this is true, it comes and it follows a yes path. Well, we really want it to follow the no path. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to change my condition because I want this now to be false to enter in the no path. So I'm going to say if number equals 0, and I can do a couple things here. I can just put not in front of is number, number, and I'm going to change that from an and to an or number equals 0, then it's going to come out of my yes loop. I had to change my logic a bit for Raptor because the conditions again follow a yes path or a no path. In your loop, your no path is going to be entered. Your yes path is going to exit you out of your loop. Do not change your logic in your pseudocode. Just go through and change it in your loop. You can do something simple by just putting not before it all, or you can actually change your condition. Either way, it's going to work out fine. So now let me come down and let me enter those numbers. So I'm going to walk through it a little bit slower the first time. I'm going to enter a 2. It's going to enter my loop. Number is a number, so the opposite of that would be false, or number equals 0. So it's going to enter my loop. It's going to come down and it's going to increment positive count by 1. And it's asking me to enter in another number. I'm going to enter in 4. And it's going to increment positive count again by 1. So positive count is now going to equal 2. And then I'm going to enter my next number, which is -5. My condition has not been met. My number is not greater than 0, so it's going to follow my no path. It's going to increment negative count by 1. And now I'm just going to go and I'm going to run this pretty quickly. I'm going to enter in 100, and then I'm going to enter in -7, and then my last actual number is 15, and then I'm going to enter 0 for done. It comes out and it gives me my output. Positive number enters 4, negative numbers entered 2. That's exactly what we saw when we did our desk checking. So we really didn't even need to do Raptor to validate that. Nested loops we talked about in chapter 5. A nested loop is a loop within a loop. So you have an outer loop and you can have an inner loop, or you could have multiple inner loops. You can have an outer loop, a middle loop, and an inner loop. You can go and you can nest these again as many times as you want to. Make sure that when you execute your loops, or when you write your loops, or you think about your loops, make sure you do your desk checking. It's very important as we walk through some of this stuff for you to really understand how the loops are being executed. So the example that we have here is we have an in count and an out count, and we have 2 for loops. So we have a for loop that goes from line 3 to line 8, and we have an inner for loop that goes from line 4 to line 6. What this will do, and I'm going to go over it pretty quickly, and I'm going to let you do the desk checking on your own. We come in here, we have 2 variables that we went through and declared. On line 3, we set out count to 1. We check the condition, 1 is less than 2. So we come down and we execute line 4. We set in count to 1. We check the condition. The condition is met, so we enter the loop. And then we output, our outer loop is, our out count is 1, and our inner loop, our in count is 1. We come down to our N4. We come back up to line 4. We increment in count by 1. We check the condition, and that it is still true, so we enter the loop. We come back, it's 3, we check the condition, we output, we come down to line 6, we come back up. Once we get to 4, we come down to line 7, then we come to line 8, we come back up to line 3, we increment out count by 1, we check the condition, and then this for loop starts all over again. So in count will now equal 1. We check the condition, and then we repeat the inner loop again. Then we come down, we come and we increment out count by 1, we check the condition. Take a couple minutes to do your desk checking, so pause the recording. All right, so we're all back. Your desk checking should look something like this. Take a moment to check yours. If you have questions on it, let me know and we can discuss it in class or come by my office hours. The last couple of things in Chapter 6 are a new way to output information to your user. We have a print statement. The print statement is very similar to the write statement that we've been using all semester. What the print statement does is it prints everything on the same line. So it just appends it right next to the last piece of information that you have outputted. If you want the information to go on a new line, you're going to use the new line indicator, which is your less than, NL, and then your greater than symbol. So some examples that we have is we have print hello class. Today will be so much fun. The actual output is hello class. You'll notice there's no space in here. Today will be so much fun. It mushed those two together. Or you could use those with the new lines at the end, which will go and we'll place these on different lines just like the write statement. I would like you to start using the print statement from here on out because the write statement is going to mean something totally new when we get to chapter 10. So go ahead and add the print statement to your quick reference guide. And then let's talk about the random function. The random function is used to generate random numbers. Depending on the language, formatting or the syntax is going to be a little bit different. We're going to use the syntax that Raptor uses because it'll make life a little bit easier. But what random will do in Raptor is it will generate a number between 0 and up to 1. So it goes from 0 to 0.99999, but it does not include 1. So random numbers are used in a whole host of things. I used to use those to generate a purchase order number, for invoice number, maybe part of your student ID was generated randomly, maybe social security numbers are generated randomly, phone numbers are probably generated randomly as well. They use some type of algorithm and they use the random function for this. Within Raptor, you're going to go and you're going to use the floor function to generate random numbers. And this is how it's read. We're going to take the floor of random times a number. This is the total numbers that you have a range. This is the total numbers you have within that range. And then we're going to increment it by your starting number. So it's going to take the floor of this randomly generated number. It's going to multiply it by the total numbers that you have within your range. And then it's going to add the starting value to that. So let's go through a couple of examples. We're going to use new number, it's an integer. And then so what we have here is floor of random times 10 plus 1. So this means that I'm going to start with 1. 1 is the beginning of my range. And I'm going to have 10 numbers. So it's going to be between 1 and 10. The next one will start at 1 and will go to 100. Now this one gets a little bit confusing. It starts at 4 and we have 10 numbers in there. So get out your hands and start counting on your fingers. You have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you have 10 numbers between 4 and 13. So those are going to produce a random number, in this case, between 4 and 13. Now let's see how to use the random function in Raptor. I'm going to take this first example and I'm going to go and I'm going to place that into Raptor. So we're going to assign a value to new number. And in this case, we're going to use the floor of random and we're going to multiply it by 10 and increment it by 1. So let's just start with the random. So if I just go through and I enter in random and I execute that, you'll see it generates a number between 1 and 0. If I continue it and I run it again, it gives me a new number and then a new number. Well, those don't really make sense. So that's why we add some additional information around it or some additional calculations. So I'm going to increase my random. I'm going to multiply it by 10. And then I don't want the decimal. I just want the whole number. So I'm going to take the floor of this and I'm going to add 1 to it. Now this will give me a number that will make a little bit more sense. So now this generates my new number of 8. So let me add some output to this. And I'm just going to go and I'm going to output new number. And now I'm going to repeat it for random times 100, which will generate something between 1 and 100. I'm going to simply copy this and change my 10 to 100. And then I'll output the new number as well. So now when I run it, you can see that my first one will generate a 1, my second one will generate a 96. And now I'm going to take my last one and put it in here, and I'm going to do the same with my output. So this is random times 10, and this is, I'm going to add 4 to it. So this is between 1 and 13. So now when I go through and I run it, I'm going to output 3 values, 9, 44, and 12. If I run it again, I'll come up with something different. 6, 61, and 12. Run it again, I come up with 2, 65, and 5. It's just going through and it's producing a random number within a specific range. Your range starts with what you're going to add to it, and your number of values is going to be what you're going to multiply the random function by. So that's it for chapter 6. Again, chapter 6 is really a combination of chapter 5 and chapter 4, allowing you to place if statements within your loops and have nested loops as well. We went over a new function, random, and we went over a new way to output, which is print. If you have any questions on any of these, post those on the discussion board or ask me during class. Thank you very much.